Reverend Izzy is the pastor of First Congregational UCC of Elkhart. And she has shared many meaningful messages with us here at UUFE. We're happy to welcome Reverend Izzy back this morning, and we're glad to see a number of her congregants who have now become our friends. Welcome, Reverend Izzy.
Welcome, y'all. So when Joan called me and said, "Hey, would you come?" and I said, "Yes, of course. What's the topic that you guys are tackling in September?" And she said, "Welcome." And immediately the phrase came to me, "There are no strangers here, only friends we haven't met yet." This is a wonderful quote that was also a part of this morning's candle lighting, or chalice lighting. But it's a great Southernism. And it's filled with flaws. And so we're going to deep dive into this morning, because I believe that welcoming the stranger is actually really important. So if you would, let's just pause for a minute, take a deep breath, let it out. Now I want you to picture in your mind all the places that you've been in your life, the great cities of the world. How were you received? I want you to hold that in your mind. Now, one of the things that I love about Unitarian Universalism is your 7 principles, one of which says that we are part of this interconnectedness of all things. So I want you to just kind of hang with me for a minute, okay? Because this is a thread that I'm going to pull on, and it may seem like it's very disconnected from the quote that I just gave you, but I promise it does connect. So I had this wonderful theological discussion with a friend of mine recently, and I am going to use this word even with you because it's a typical churchy, religious kind of word, but I'm using it in the sense of violation, okay? The word sin. Please don't hate me. So we were having this conversation about the interconnectedness of all things, and we were talking about how this web was created rather intentionally. We cannot live apart from one another. We may think we can. We may think that we can be an island unto ourselves. But often it doesn't go so well. Our mental health is affected, our physical health is affected, our spiritual health is affected. And before we know it, we feel so isolated and so alone that we don't know how to get back into the whole of the community. So in the midst of this theological conversation, because I, like probably most of you, don't believe in the concept of hell. I don't believe in damnation. I don't believe that God, whoever God is, would send people to a place like that for all eternity. Never believed it. Raised Southern Baptist, couldn't buy it then, don't buy it now. Okay? Just setting the record straight. But we were asking the question, and I think it was a valid question. If we don't believe in all that stuff, then what is the consequence for violation, for sin? There has to be something. It can't just be a get out of jail free card, go straight to, the divine hereafter, whatever that may be. Because there's always, in every single conversation like this, the question of, well, what about Hitler? What about Jeffrey Dahmer? What about Charles Manson? The worst of the worst of the worst. What about these people? Are they received back into the fabric of all that is? Are they welcomed back? in any way, shape, or form. So here's where we landed, and this is how it connects back. Because I believe that this interconnected web is how we were meant to be, so connected to each other and to all living things, that the consequence for me is isolation. When we violate community, when we violate the very planet that gives us life, we have this complete and total separation and isolation. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know of any other consequence that could be more severe. One of the things that happens in the South that is so sad to me is that this statement about there are no strangers, only friends we haven't met yet, that means literally friends that look like us, that sound like us, that are like us. Yes, we will open our doors widely to people that are just like us. But it's really the stranger, the whole of what that word means. See, to me, that statement is an all-encompassing statement, but it's not used that way. For most of my childhood, I felt like I was on the outside. I didn't fit in. I didn't fit in at church. I was so different for lots of reasons. I was definitely a stranger in a strange land. The isolation that comes with not being adequately connected, I think it's the root of depression, anxiety, fear, so many things. And what we end up with is a half-baked, half-lived life. Now, we sang a hymn about the garden this morning. And along with this great theological conversation, we've been talking about Genesis. It's one of my favorite books of the Bible for a lot of reasons. Not because I buy it, but because I like to push against it. Right? And here's the thing. If we can think for just a second that there was something bigger than ourselves that maybe caused the spark of whatever caused all of this to be created that we can see around us. The story of the garden is a great story to imagine how we began to coalesce into society. Now, the story of the fall of man is very weak, in my personal, humble opinion. What I find fascinating is that I believe that it's this moment, this interaction between Adam and Eve and the garden and God, where they enter into a complete and full understanding of what it means to be connected. They're entering into the fullness of life. Until they could see, until they could know both sides of the story, they were missing out on half of the challenge, the more necessary challenge. It's easy if you're created perfect. There are no decisions to make. There's nothing that you have to do. There's no one that you have to figure out because everybody's perfect. Everybody's behaving perfectly. We just exist. But when there are flaws, when there are chinks in the armor, when there are things that we don't know, those become the challenges. And the challenges are where we grow. The challenges are where we are transformed. The challenges are where we figure out how we are in connection to everything else. And so when we come to this place of saying, oh, wow, yeah, everything's connected, in my mind, that means that we have finally entered into the fullness of life. We understand both the good and the consequences of not being there. I don't like the consequences. I don't know about you, but when I have been on the outside, when I have felt that isolation, it is painful. It is so painful. And sometimes it runs so deep, and you wonder, am I ever going to find my way out of this? If you've ever been down at the bottom of a dark pit, you know that the only way that you can really get out is with the help of other people. Somebody's got to throw you a lifeline. They've got to drop a rope or a ladder or something. You cannot climb out of that mess on your own. And if you have done it, please find me later and tell me how you did it, because I've never been able to do it. I've always believed from, I don't know, the time I was probably in the 3rd or 4th grade, that everything that God has created belongs to God. And when we die, it all goes right back to God. There is no separation. There is no separation. And so when folks would stand in the pulpit and talk about this eternal separation, it just made me just cringe. And I wanted to stand up on a Sunday morning and shout, how do you know? How do you know? Did God come and sit on the end of your bed and say, now on Sunday morning you need to preach this because this is the gospel? I don't think so. I've been begging God for I don't know how long to come sit on the end of my bed and us have a tete-a-tete, and that has not happened yet. But I know by lived experience that I have been on the outside and I've been on the inside, and it's much sweeter when you're connected. It's much sweeter when you can walk outside and hug a tree and recognize that you're cut from the same cloth. It's much sweeter when you can walk out into your backyard, into your garden, and pick a tomato and see that this is also a point of connection. It's much sweeter when you can walk up to a stranger, someone you don't know, and still find common ground. It's much sweeter when you can walk into a community such as this and recognize that we really are all the same. We may look a little different. We may have different careers, different jobs, different purposes in life, but fundamentally, we're all the same. There's something about that interconnectedness of all things that also nudges me. Okay, that's not right. That's not the strongest word I could use. That pulls me, that tethers me maybe to what I know to be true and right in the world. I can try to escape it, but I don't do a very good job. Somehow, that interconnectedness always finds me, even when I don't want it to. Even in those moments where I'm curled up in the fetal position in my bed saying, please, world, go away. Somehow it finds me, usually in the form of a phone call, or somebody dropping by, or someone banging on the front door because they're delivering something. I mean, pick a scenario. Somehow the universe always manages to pull me back in, if I'll let it. And that's the key. See, I have to be willing to allow this to happen. And if we think about the people that we know that are behaving contrary to that which supports community, one of the things that you always hear in the news cycle is that they were a loner. They found themselves on the outside. And then we ask the question, I don't care which news cycle it is, but they always ask the question, did anyone notice? And that's probably where we need to take a look at ourselves. Because we probably do notice. But what do we do about it? This is the hard part. When we see people outside of the community and we don't go out and intentionally pull them back. If we don't seek out the stranger, they can never become our friend. If we don't make space for the stranger, they're never going to feel like they fit in, ever. If we don't make our front porches a place for sanctuary, they're not going to know that they can knock on our front door. If we don't have a welcome mat out in front of our front door, they're not going to know. There's a great Amish tradition of hanging a star on the side of their houses or their barns. And that star represents welcome. It means, stranger, you can stop here and we will provide you with a place to stay, with food, whatever you need, and then you'll be on your way. That's the traditional meaning of the star. I read a really interesting thing on the internet. Now, you can take it for what it's worth, because you can Google just about anything and find what you're looking for. But one of the stories that I read was about keeping an extra room in the house. And it was literally called the stranger's room. So when people stopped by, when they were journeying, you didn't know them, but you could offer them the stranger's room. Now, I like that story, whether it's true or not. It doesn't matter. I like the practice. And can we think of this actually as a spiritual practice, as a way of being in the world, of intentionally, like so intentionally welcoming and inviting in the stranger? I used to joke about the South a lot more than I do now, about some of their strange ways. I grew up in a family that it always felt like even when you were being hugged and welcomed, that you were also being stabbed in the back. Right? They're just so catty. You know, they have so many horrible things to say to you, all the while saying, "Oh, it's so good to see you." Right? I want to say that disingenuousness is not becoming. These people are also what we call the pot stirrers. They keep all the family drama going, right? Nobody would want to welcome a stranger into that kind of mess. And I wonder if some of the ways in which we behave within our families of origin have an impact on how we invite the stranger. Because if we treat each other that way, people that you know oh so well, how is it that you could ever invite somebody that you don't know into that? Most of us are probably ashamed of that kind of behavior, and that's why we keep people at a distance. And so this really is an internal work at first. We have to clean up our own stuff, and that's hard. We don't want it. We don't like it, and we don't like change. And it occurred to me that in the midst of this huge theological conversation I was having with my friend, that I must first accept me as a stranger. I must accept myself and all that I bring to the table. I must love myself for who I am before I can truly love someone else. That's hard. I've said many times, I'm great at loving other people. Probably not as great at loving myself. In fact, we find that self-deprecating humor is some of the funniest humor that we offer the world. But it's not funny. Not really. When I have to put myself down in order to speak, in order to be heard, that is also a way of isolating myself from everybody else. I never knew there was so much to this little tiny phrase until I really got into it and started thinking about my experiences growing up with this particular phrase and all the bits and pieces that swirl around it. I remember when we first moved to Valdosta, Georgia, and before they even asked what you did or where you lived, they asked, what church do you go to? Now I understand. They needed to make sure that you went to the right church before they knew what you did for a living. And if you didn't go to a church at all, yeah, they didn't care what you did for a living. No, they really didn't. That's the truth. Because they weren't going to do business with you. And it's strange growing up and believing that there were certain places and spaces that were the right places and spaces. But I also had this experience in that right place. Had a family who came to our church one Sunday morning at the 11 o'clock hour, and they didn't look like everybody else in the congregation. And they were told, you cannot sit here. This is somebody else's pew. They were asked to move, and instead of staying, they got up and they walked out. I was embarrassed for the whole congregation. It was just sad. Sad. That is not embracing extravagant welcome. That is picking and choosing who we're going to like because they're just like us. See, extravagant welcome goes right back to this connectedness. We don't get to choose who is right next to us in this web of life. We don't. We don't get to pick and choose who we welcome into our lives. I mean, we think we do. We think we get to choose all the time, but I don't think we get to choose. I think we ignore. We pretend like they don't exist. But the truth is, they keep coming back around, that very type of person that you need in your life. And instead of walking away and isolating them from the community, maybe the better question we should be asking is, what do I need to learn by their presence? What do I need to learn? Because there's always more learning for me to do. Always more learning. And so sometimes the friends that we haven't met yet, the people that we know are strangers to us, may be the exact person we need in our lives in order to overcome a lot of stuff. To become the very best version of ourselves that we can be. And ultimately, isn't that what it's all about? Becoming the very best version of ourselves that we can be. So while I think it's a great slogan, there are no strangers here, only friends we haven't met yet. My challenge for you this morning is that first you become a friend to yourself, and then you open your arms as wide as you possibly can to welcome extravagantly those that you do not know yet. That you risk just a little bit to find out what you might not know, to be friends with someone you don't know, to befriend those who are from another culture, whose skin color isn't your skin color, someone with unique family traditions. We could come up with a long list, and by the time we get through with that list, if you practice this, you'd be meeting somebody new every single day of the year. There's so much that we can do to change our world. And I think it starts with welcome. May it be so. Amen.
I think we have a few minutes. Lizzie is always accepting as far as having us do some talk back and comments. And wow, I want to just say one thing, Izzy, about welcoming strangers. I think in our culture today, we have developed fear of strangers, fear of the other, fear of what might happen to us if we're naive enough to welcome someone into our home. And maybe we don't love ourselves enough if that's how we feel. Thank you. Other people? No?
I think it's really interesting. We're admonished to keep the doors locked to somebody we don't know just prior to your service.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Were you? The other thing I wanted to say is that I think that interconnected web is true all the time.
Yes.
It's just that our awareness of it varies.
Yeah.
And when we are aware, we're so richly blessed by being welcomed and welcoming both.
Yes.
I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, but I think the modern trend in penology, they're discovering that the ultimate punishment is not death,
Right.
but solitary confinement.
Yes, that is correct. That isolation, I mean, just very quickly, by show of hands, how many of you have ever felt isolation? Right. So you know when I talk about that, what that means. And it's horrible. It's really horrible.
I think the most isolated I've ever felt was in a large crowd. I was at Alcona Country Club at a party or a dance or something. And when you talk about getting to know yourself and love yourself, I learned that getting away from my very large family and going out on the river on just a floaty and telling my 6 kids, don't call me unless someone dies. Just getting that time alone. Aloneness is different than isolation.
Yes.
I also wanted to say, I lived in my early 30s in Valdosta, Georgia for 13 months and 5 days. I comprehend.
I'm so sorry that you had to experience that. I have been asked, I kid you not, like I've been asked so many times since I've moved up here, why did you move from the South? And I'm like, are you kidding me? They only have 2 seasons, hot and hotter. They're the high place in the swamp where you have alligators, rattlesnakes, water moccasins, copperheads, fleas, ticks, chiggers, gnats, and cockroaches the size of your hand. Who would want to live there? Yeah. I told my brother last night, I said, I've lived here 8 years and I've not seen a snake. Not a single one. I know they exist, but I just haven't seen one. You can't go a summer without seeing at least 10 dead rattlesnakes on a dirt road. It's the truth.
Yeah, I get isolation. I never fit in anywhere in school, like ever. Eric can attest to that. But even here, I barely exchanged words for my first 6 to 9 months before I actually had a conversation with anyone.
Oh,
The good thing is you kept coming back, right? And sometimes we have to create space for ourselves, even when other people don't. And that's the hard part, to keep coming back.
I liked what you said about making a sanctuary on our front porch to show welcome, because how do you do that? How do you, especially as someone who's not just out talking all the time, and our houses are our private places, or our homes. I had a wonderful experience a year ago. I was fixing the privacy fence in my backyard and decided I wanted it to only be a 4-foot fence to keep my dog in and not a privacy fence. And as I was rebuilding it, a little girl who I never would have come into contact with except that I was taking down the fence came over and spent the day hanging out with me. And I was like, okay, I am definitely building a gate as well. And a year later, she still comes through that gate, finds me when I'm working outside. I've met her parents, and it's literally broken down fences and walls and opened a door.
Thank you for sharing that.
We are going to go a
All the
little
way in the
bit
back.
over, but I think this is so valuable that I hope you all understand it'll be a couple minutes late before we get to potluck. You'll just be that much hungrier.
I'm moving so I can be on the camera so people on Zoom can see who's talking. So I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but my wife and I have that modern house design. If you look back at houses built in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, they pretty much all had front porches. What do you notice about houses built since probably like the 80s or 90s? The only thing you see from the street is the garage door. There's no front porch. There's at best a stoop. Sometimes there isn't even a door facing the street. Everyone in their homes is in their deck or in their basement. And in our neighborhood, when we built our house, we had intentionally had a front porch. And I think maybe one other house in our neighborhood has a front porch. So when we go for walks, like we're pretty sure there are people home in most of the homes there. We never see anyone. There are a few people who their kids play in the front yard or they go for walks too. But this is a very, for a neighborhood, it doesn't feel neighborly enough because everyone is spending their time by themselves on their back deck or somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So true.
I'm going to say we'll let Emily have the last word this morning.
When I first moved into my house here, I could see into all the neighbors' yards. It was just wide open. Somebody put in an above-ground pool, up went a 6-foot fence. People next door had dogs they didn't want to be out, up went a 6-foot fence. And we used to relate. And it's not that we don't want to relate, it's we never see each other. Mm-hmm. And it's terrible, truly.
Yeah. I'll leave you with one word: intentionality. Right? We must be intentional about walking across the street, saying hello to our neighbors, getting to know the people that live next door. When you talk about the fence, we intentionally put in a 4-foot fence because we have neighbor that we dearly love, and he just comes over and brings tomatoes or peppers or whatever, and we take stuff to him. We have neighbors across the street that we dearly love, and we took a mom over to one of our neighbors yesterday. I mean, we've been very intentional, right? And this is new. We didn't do that in the South. Even though this quote comes from the South, we didn't do that in the South, right? Everybody locked their doors and prayed nobody would break in. That was the fear, right? We have to move beyond that.
We're going to sing about the friendly place. I hope we are. This is short, so Lizzie's going to play it through all the way for an introduction, and we'll sing it twice. And remain standing for the benediction, but since COVID, our tradition is to sit for the postlude as Lizzie plays on the piano. May you stand and sing if you're willing and able. 414.
And now for all who see God, may God go with you. For all who embrace life, may life return your affection. For all who seek a right path, may a way be found, and may you find the courage to take that path step by step. The blessing of truth be upon us. May the power of love direct us and sustain us. And may the peace of Christ and the peace of this community preserve our going out and our coming in from this time forth until we meet again. Amen.